Welcome to another episode of AppSec Insiders Podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about relatively new security-related AWS services. I'm Iman, and
And I'm Farshad.
And I'm Zohaib.
uh, we are your hosts of this episode of AppSec Insider. And joining us today, we have our guest Zohaib. Welcome, Zohaib. Welcome back. It was a good session. And as always, this is a show where we explore the ever evolving and intriguing world of application and cloud security. Before we get into today's discussion, there are a few housekeeping items. As we know, October is Security Awareness Month, and make sure that you do your part to keep everything secure. And about the events, actually, we have OS Vancouver on October 17th. Jivan is the speaker. And the talk is about security tools optimization. And also, Fasha is going to be the speaker in LastCon conference on October 24th. And his talk is about CI/CD's pipeline security. Lastly, if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who you think may enjoy listening. That would mean a lot to us. And I'm going to start with AWS Detective. And my first question would be, how does AWS Detective's machine learning driven approach to security analysis compare to those traditional log analysis method in terms of detecting sophisticated threats and reducing false positives?
That's a great question. I would say that AWS Detective uses machine learning and statistical models to analyze and visualize security across AWS resources. So you get more intelligent insights. In the last episode, we talked a lot about some of the after the fact and real-time log reading and log interpretation. This one is more intelligent insights compared to manual or traditional log-based methods. As opposed to sophisticated events, I would say it correlates data sources that are disparate. So like VPC flow logs, CloudTrail logs, things of that nature. It would correlate them to identify attack patterns and anomalies that might be missed by rule-based systems. As for reducing false positives, I would say machine learning models in general help minimize false positives by learning what the normal behavior patterns are and flagging only the genuine anomalies it has not seen before.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Zohaib. I think we were talking about this the other day. Like, what's the difference between this and a SIM?
This and what?
And a SIM, like your typical security information event management platform. Like a cloud, let's say, I mean, a CloudWatch is not really a SIM, but let's say a lot of people do use it as a SIM. But like, let's say I'm a company and I've got my like QRadar or I don't know, Splunk or something that's acting as my SIM. What advantages does this provide? Like, is that complementary or would this be something that can substitute one of those other platforms?
So I would say for each of the different functions or aspects is a very slight difference that adds up to a big difference. So for example, when it comes to log collection, AWS Detective would automatically pull security related data from specific AWS services that you specify and then provides deep analysis. SIM would be more ingesting from a wide variety of sources, would definitely go like also on-premises servers, network devices, applications, whereas Detective is pretty much on any logging based systems. Um, I will say another big difference is definitely in integration. AWS Detective integrates very tightly with AWS services into security families such as GuardDuty, CloudTrail, Flow logs. It's specifically designed for environments. SIM can integrate. I'm not trying to make the claim that it cannot integrate, and can also collect and correlate logs from non-AWS systems. So SIM would be more for a hybrid approach or a multi-cloud environment, or and a Detective would be more for a purely AWS driven.
Yeah, awesome. Now that Farshad has talked about the SIEMs, the next question is, what are the key challenges organizations face when integrating AWS Detective into their existing SIEM ecosystem, and how can these be overcome? Like,
I think
I
that's
assume like AWS Detective is complementary to the SIEM based on our discussion. And please go ahead.
I would say the number one challenge is definitely integration. Similar to the last point that I made, integration with SIM can be challenging. As Iman said, Detective is a very good complementary service. Not to mention that since it is designed for natively designed for logs and date time format logs, it's different data formats may require some additional setup. It's not impossible, however, will not work as out of the box as SIM ecosystems. Um, Go
So
ahead.
I have a question for you. Last time when we were talking, I don't know if it was this service or something else, you were saying, hey, it's a new service that's Kubernetes focused. What was that one?
Kubernetes focus would be for verified access as well as um, EKS trusted access as well.
Yeah, there was a new service that you were mentioning that seemed to grab logs and everything, but it was very Kubernetes specific, as opposed to like something like CloudWatch that can just generally receive log data. But I thought maybe I'm confusing that with Detective, but it seems like Detective is not just for Kubernetes. Detective can be used for a number of services that are supported by it, if I'm not mistaken.
So yes, you are 100% correct. It is not so detective is used for a wide variety of services. However, what I've personally been noticing is a very big amount of use case being in EKS, since you would want to analyze what's causing certain issues with certain clusters or what's breaking connections or where things are certainly breaking, you would want to be able to tell the trends from the logs. So I noticed a lot of it being used in EKS. I'm sure it's being used a lot elsewhere, but it's been reported a lot more in EKS.
I see. Okay, okay. So if I can think of Detective, and correct me if I'm wrong, Detective seems like a AWS native kind of a SIM because, like you mentioned, it already understands the data formats for specific AWS service, got native integration, and it's aggregating those logs. And it goes further because it uses machine learning to analyze those data patterns, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, that's correct. You absolutely can do that.
Cool, very
Yes.
cool, very cool. So when people are deciding what to use for detection, I guess back in the day, you know, the poor man's version was to use CloudWatch and aggregate the logs in there and use some of the basic rules, and then ultimately people would bring in a full-blown SIM into the environment. But it sounds like you don't really need a SIM if you use Detective and everything is in AWS. Is that the case?
So, speaking very truthfully, if you are using a traditional pure log-based environment in a pure AWS environment, yes, you could absolutely use AWS Detective out of the box, works with everything that generates logs. If there is more niche use cases, not to say anything negative about them, if there are more niche use cases in regards to the types of data that's being collected, I can understand the need for a SIM to be involved.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but in general, also, I believe for alert correlation, we can use AWS Event Bridge to forward detective findings to the SIEM, and then we develop like correlation rule sets in the SIEM to kind of have like the good correlation actually. Other than that, yeah, awesome. Let's go for the next question. And can you discuss the privacy and compliance implications of using AWS Detective, particularly in industries with strict data protection regulations like healthcare or finance?
Yes, so AWS Detective does follow most of the security compliance frameworks, including HIPAA, GDPR, and the SOC ones. I'll be very honest, I'm positive it also supports ISO ones, but I don't remember which ones off the top of my head. Um, for some industry specific considerations, I would say data residency should be the number one, I won't say concern, but the number one focus. Data residency as well as access controls. They should be implemented carefully to make sure you're meeting regional data protection laws. I live in Texas. TexRamp is in place, very in a fun way, stringent and strict on the data residency laws. Um, I do also strongly recommend regular auditing. There are detective configurations that you can ensure data retention policies aligning with compliance requirements.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. Let's switch to Amazon Q. And my question is that I believe it's a relatively new service and it's like it uses generative AI. And it's kind of an LLM, am I right? It's like large language model.
That's correct.
Yeah, and my question is that how does Amazon Q's code generation capability impact application security, and what are the best practices should development teams adopt to ensure AI-generated code meets security standards. And before that, like I've seen like 70% of the codes that are being generated with ChatGPT or other LLMs are vulnerable because they're being trained on vulnerable code bases. And yeah, that's the question.
Okay, yeah, I would say that it is a very, very good tool. It is amazing for rapid, accelerated development, but it should never, as with anything that isn't developed or at least checked off by a human, should not be implemented into any production environment without at first checking or some form of penetration testing, which board security does provide. A plug in there, but I would say for any LLM, even prior to LLM, even any machine learning based or computer based, rule based create code creation, it should always be tested first, heavily, extensively to any security compliance standards. For best practices, manual code reviews, as fun as that is, manual code reviews during Scrum meetings. There's even analysis tools you can use for security flaws. Um, and double checking organization security policies outside of just regional ones.
Yeah, manual code reviews could have prevented a number of things. The Solar Winds attack could have been prevented because someone put some code in, it went through the pipeline, got signed. A gate on the pull request, hey, manual code review is required. That would have helped. Same with the recent one with CrowdStrike, right? Like someone went and changed something, it got deployed into people's computers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, manual code review, and then of course, adding automated security tools in the pipeline as well. So adding your typical SaaS, then particularly SaaS, I don't know if SCA will help much in this case, but some specialized SaaS tools, and then educating developers on secure coding practices, as always.
Awesome.
Yes,
Yeah.
the
Also,
more but I would say the more boring it is, the more secure it is at the end,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
not
Uh,
always, yeah, but I
oh,
believe also we should come up with better prompts. Like developers, they don't know how to write secure prompts.
Yeah, yeah. Prompt engineering is like the one tip I will give. So I work primarily on Gen AI tools in AWS. The number one tip, the question I always get the most is how do I write better prompts? Ask the LLM. I'm not even joking. Just the thing that you wanted to create. Say, hey, I would like you to create X, Y, and Z. Give me a good prompt. Here's the parameters. Here's the expected output. That LLM will know its limits, and that LLM will tell you exactly how to ask a specific prompt. So if you wanted to come up with a specific function in a code, or you wanted to create scripts to parse through certain things or apply a group policy or anything, and you're using an LLM, ask that LLM, how would I write this? Here's the security compliance standards we're meeting. Make it adhere to these.
Awesome.
That's the best. Ask the LLM how you would want it to ask itself, and usually you
Yeah,
get
that's true.
Yeah, reinforcement learning,
yes.
And can you discuss the potential security risks and benefits of using Q to analyze and refactor existing code base, especially a legacy application with known vulnerabilities, actually?
I would say the biggest risk is definitely the resurfacing of legacy code when using Amazon Q. There are times where if you are working with a hybrid, whether it's half legacy, half modern, or you are working on modernizing something, and you try to train off of you provide that legacy data to Q to learn from, you may unintentionally introduce new bugs or pre-modernized code that ends up flaring up security issues,
Yeah.
uh, especially in complex legacy environments. Which there you go, manual code reviews once again. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, I think that's a good portion of the risks.
What one interesting thing for the audience to think about is that the tool might misinterpret the context or logic of the code, and that could actually lead to some interesting functional errors or even security issues, right? And the other thing I was thinking about is that the AI generated refactoring might actually inadvertently reduce, like put in new vulnerabilities if you don't carefully review them. So of course, there's that whole bias problem. I mean, if it's reading bad code, then it's got security vulnerabilities and it's trained on that. But further, its ability to come up with new things based on existing data could introduce new vulnerabilities, if not reviewed by people.
Yes, absolutely. Be careful with what you are exposing to Q. You want to make sure that the context that it's given is the context that it's going to take from. it will read every single line you give it. If you're giving it a lot of legacy code, it's going to learn from the legacy code or
Yeah.
legacy. It doesn't even have to be code. It could be data structuring, schema, control lists, how logs are formed. It could be any little thing that can be overlooked
Yeah.
querying any specific list history of queries, which you definitely don't want to share with an LLM. History of specific access permissions based role-based permissions. There's anything you give it, it'll learn from.
Yeah, totally. And I guess the one upside, like let's flip it now, talking about benefits. Like the one benefit is that it can quickly identify outdated or insecure code or patterns and suggesting modern, better ways of doing it, more modern alternatives, right? So that refactoring becomes a lot more efficient. It speeds up that process of modernizing legacy systems. I've used it to convert old scripts from one language to the other because it looks at it and it can easily refactor it in a different language. So that can potentially reduce the window of exposure for known vulnerabilities. So something to think about.
Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. I forgot who it was. I don't know who said it, but someone said C, when it comes to programming language, C makes it easy to hit yourself in the foot. C++ makes it harder, but when you do it, blows your whole leg off. I think what was it? Was I forgot the creator of C's name. I think it was him who said it. But it is exactly like that. You have an extremely powerful tool in the palm of your hands, but it's powerful and it will, if you give it a wide range of things to learn from, it'll learn from it. So be careful with what you feed into the LLM, or what you, in this case, what data sets and context you expose to Q developer. Make sure it's only reading from what you want it to learn from, and it'll give you exactly what you want it to give you.
Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. And how do you compare Amazon Q versus SAST? I mean, if we want to use, and by SAST I mean static application security testing tools. Can we use Amazon Q instead of our SaaS? And what are the benefits? What are the limitations? What are the risks?
I would say the benefit or the main comparisons, like off the top of the head, is definitely in more Q would do more immediate feedback with more code generation suggestions, whereas traditional SaaS tools like I don't know, SonarQube would provide a more in-depth, comprehensive analysis after the code's written. Q is great for rapid development, rapid prototyping, get something ready, get something minimally viable product, and then you would rely on SaaS to get that minimally viable product to a more production ready application.
But
I mean, but when I'm talking about like finding vulnerabilities, like if we use Q for finding vulnerabilities,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Sorry, I would say Q is great for um, in terms of actual finding vulnerabilities, I would say Q is a great as an assistant. It's able to scan on common vulnerabilities. Um, you can have it suggest secure coding patterns, highlight potential vulnerabilities after the fact, and that's more real. I should say not after the fact. Sorry, during the fact, and that's more real-time resource compared to SAST, which typically analyzes code for any possible vulnerabilities post-development.
yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because I think to me the biggest advantage is that like a lot of the traditional SaaS tools out there are rules based, right? Like SemGraph, this, that, Vercode, they're all rules based. And rules only gets you so far. Like, yeah, you do the research, you find that pattern, that if that pattern is identified in that, code base, then that could be a potential vulnerability. But the big advantage that I see with AI here is that it's not rules based. Like it's trained, and if it's trained well on a large and good enough data set, then to me, it's going to be able to find security issues better than a rules-based scanner. The analogy that I always think about is, going back and looking at antivirus tools. Back in the 90s, when I started, antivirus tools were all rules-based, right? And a lot of them still use signatures, but then, the people that were writing the viruses, they figured out, hey, we're going to write polymorphic viruses. Now the signature changes. So using rules or signature matching doesn't work. You have to go to heuristics and other ways of detecting patterns and going, hey, this looks like it could be a virus rather than rules based, right? So using something like Q that leverages AI, if it's doing that, then that could be hugely advantageous as long as the model is trained well, which I don't really know.
It's better than seeing 19 pop-ups for potential virus or potential threat. What was that one? I think it was My Doom. That was the big one. I think that was the year I was born. I'll be honest. I think that was
Yeah.
96. That was a big one. That very much, I don't know if it influenced the industry, but it was a big influence in terms of the actual products for antivirus itself to go
Right.
more less rule-based, more go with the flow. Like, hey, things are going to come up. You gotta predict, like, hey, that's not normal. Even if it's not traditional ML, it specifically says this is what's normal, this is what they're doing. That's not normal. Block.
Exactly.
Awesome, awesome. I want to switch to another relatively new service, which is AWS Verified Access. Could you please give us like a brief intro and also compare AWS Verified Access zero trust approach versus traditional VPN? And yeah, just talk about like security benefits and potential attack vectors if you can, please.
Yeah, absolutely. As a brief introduction to AWS Verified Access, it's a way to provide secure access to applications without requiring the use of a VPN, a virtual private network. It evaluates each application request and helps ensures that users can access each application once they meet a specific security requirement criteria. In regards to the zero trust approach and how it differs from traditional solutions, I would say verified access operates on the principle of continuous verification for every request. So VPNs is a broad network access once authenticated. So, verified access is more so a continuous verification check on what exactly you're trying to access. Um, the security benefits would definitely be reducing the attack surface by limiting access to specific applications and resources. Um, Minimizing the lateral movement by isolating resources and verifying each action, as well as I would say instead of actually for reporting sake in terms of a benefit, so better visibility and control of access compared to the VPNs. As for let's say benefits in terms of attack vectors, um, credentials as well. Yes, 100%. It mitigates risks to compromise credentials. VPNs can expose internal networks if breached. That's the one that I'll give.
Awesome. I believe it has more like we can have context-aware access decisions also, right? Versus like typically static access policies in VPNs. We can have context-aware access decisions. Awesome. And my next question is that can you discuss the challenges and best practices for integrating verified access with existing identity providers, IDP, and authentication systems, especially in hybrid cloud environments, actually?
I'll start with the challenges first. I would say as with every I think this is the same in terms of challenge. This is the same challenge given for every service mentioned. Integration with existing identity providers. So Active Directory, Okta, those are the two that off the top of my head, in hybrid environments can pose a challenge. This is a relatively new service and a big change to existing architecture base, or excuse me, authentication into existing architecture, as well as I'd say this is less of a, well, you said challenge is not risk. This is definitely a challenge, not a risk. The first one is definitely a risk. Maintaining consistency across multi-cloud or hybrid environments. There may be different security policies that exist in different sections of the environment, and those are typically VPN based. So if you have a continuous authentication approach, it's very different. Like you can either get a key to the building, or I give you a set of keys to each individual room. Um, Sometimes I just want a key to the building because I need to get into every single room at some point. Sometimes some person only needs a key to one room. I don't want them to access every single room. Maybe they're busy. Maybe there's throughput issues. Maybe there's things that they don't need to be seeing. I'm not saying one is worse or better, but it's definitely a challenge to and imagine if both of those workers are in the same building. Having to keep consistency across that is definitely a challenge.
So is there like central configure? Is that the challenge that there's no central policy configuration, or is that there, but this is a different challenge?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
In terms of the that you were talking about, one of the challenges that you can end up with different policies across different environment platforms, that sort of thing, right? Is it because there's no central way of configuring them, so you're doing it, individually at each environment or platform, or is the challenge that you're referring to because of a different problem?
So you can have there is a centralized way to configure policies. It allows you to define, let's say, context-aware policies. It's just different. That's the problem. I'm not going to say problem. That's the challenge. It's definitely different. You can make policies based off of identity attributes or even device postures or security context. So if your laptop uses a browser that's too long out of updates, then you can start restricting access to that laptop and not allow it to access internal environments, things like that.
Gotcha.
So it does have a centralized mechanism. It's just different. That's the main challenge.
Awesome.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. What about implementing just-in-time access? You know,
I'm sorry?
for best practices, what about implementing just-in-time access? Like some of the best practices, like I don't know. Can you suggest some of the best practices when we use verified access?
I would say, let me think about this. So for implementing just in time, I would say in general, least privilege access. Some of the main things still are, most of the main things are still in play. Least privilege access, temporary credentials, MFA, um,
I see.
actual, now the one thing that would be different would be the approval workflow. So making sure that that part is automated would definitely be the number one way. And what I mean by that is when you actually or when you implement an approval workflow that can integrate with an existing identity provider like Okta or Active Directory, you can ensure that access requests are vetted and approved by a security team or an automated process before granting access just in time. Um, as
Awesome.
an example for like, if I was trying to think of an example for someone that's onboarding, you can absolutely say, hey, this person has X, Y, and Z level access, but let's say the manager forgot to mention or give grant access to a new asset. And when this new employee tries to access it and they're denied, a security team in real time can verify and the manager say, oh, I forgot. Yes, grant access.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Awesome.
Sense.
Awesome. That's great. And the next question is, what are the key considerations for implementing fine-grained access control using verified access? And how can organizations balance security with user experience?
Balancing security with user experience could feel like its own dissertation at this point. Some key considerations, I would say define very clear and specific access policies, again, based on least privilege access. And definitely use contextual factors. So, uh, user identity, device type, locations when granting access. So, example I'll give is if a specific employee is granted work from home 3 days a week, fingers crossed. Um, if their laptop is if it's between 9 to 5 and local time, the laptop is at the public IP address of their home. If the employee is willing to share that, then yeah, access can be granted. And you can have automated policy enforcement as well to make sure the access control is consistent throughout. Uh,
Right.
if for every employee that's working from home, fingers crossed, make sure that it's from 9 to 5 at their local time and they have to be at the public IP address of their home. As for balancing security and user experience, pray. I hope that whatever you implement is, no, I'm just joking. I would avoid excessive friction by using single sign-on. Um, Adaptive authentication in general helps streamline user access. It's I would, and also with so this is more of a personal opinion. Multi-factor authentication hardware, in my opinion, is usually picked up better, or at least better received. I understand it's an additional purchase, like a fingerprint reader, even if it's what is it? I think it's called a YubiKey or
Yep.
Yeah,
yeah, a
FIDO
YubiKey.
YubiKeys, yeah.
Very quick thumbprint done. That's a second authentication factor. But other than that, there you can also provide self-service options for users to resolve access issues.
Awesome.
So password resets for multi-factor authentication have I forgot what the server is called, but you can input two codes one after another so that it can resynchronize I forgot the name of the server, the name of the service, but you can resynchronize your 2FA, your software 2FA. There's different self-service options you can use to just help reduce the time to calling IT support, basically.
Awesome, awesome. And yeah, as you told, passwordless authentication, it improves the UX. And also, like, I believe implementing automated approval workflow for access requests is also a valid consideration. And yep, that concludes this episode of our AppSec Insiders podcast. We hope you have enjoyed learning about these relatively new AWS security services. And now that we looked at some foundational services, I believe, are we going to have another session, or this is going to be our final session? Like,
Well, we don't know yet. So we had
okay,
the first one that was on WAF and Cognito, and then we've done this one on some of the newer services. We might potentially do another one. So
I
keep
see.
keep listening, and
Keep an
we'll
eye.
let you know.
Yeah, keep an eye on us, and remember also to tune in our next session as we delve deeper in the role of application and cloud security. We appreciate your support and engagement. And if you have any topics in your mind, please don't hesitate and send an email to us, appsecinsiders at forwardsecurity.com. Or our Twitter handle is FWD_SEC, or feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. And please also consider subscribing to our podcast. Have a good one.
Hey, and thanks again to Zohaib and AWS. Zohaib, really appreciated your insights and look forward to hopefully doing this again.
Thank
Yeah,
you very much,
absolutely
sir.
happy to be here. Happy to help.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Happy Cybersecurity Month.